Hello, everybody. Hi. So as y'all come in and get your seats, I want to welcome you to our U.S. Senate Candidate Forum tonight, both those of you who have joined us in person and those folks who are watching on Facebook Live online. My name is Jessie Blakely. I'm the State Director for the Family Foundation Action. We are an organization committed to electing leaders who will champion biblical principles in the public square. I know y'all are here because you know that this November's election will be critical in determining the direction of our Commonwealth and of our nation. It's a decision really as to whether our families, our churches, and our nation's best institutions will continue to come under threat from the radical left, or whether we will elect champions who will defend our faith, our families, and the things that make our nation great. So we hope that this forum will help you as you make a decision as to who that champion will be in November in the general election, and hopefully beyond that. So before we get started, I want to take a brief minute to thank our sponsors, Winning Republican Strategies, American Fortitude, the American Principles Project, and Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance. Join me in thanking them. I also want to thank our wonderful hosts for tonight, the Good News Free Will Baptist Church. It's fantastic to have this space and have folks who are able to open their church to us to make this possible. So before we kick off, and we're going to start with a word of prayer in a minute, I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, former Delegate Chris Saxman. He is currently the Executive Director for Virginia Free, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that was established in 1988. It informs the business community in order to advance free enterprise and responsible pro-business government. Delegate Saxman served in the Virginia House of Delegates from 2002 to 2010, and in 2010, Saxman co-chaired the K-12 transition team for Governor-elect Bob McDonnell. In 2021, more recently, the Lieutenant Governor-elect Winsome Earle-Sears, who we all love very much, asked Saxman to lead her transition, her inauguration, and her PAC. So we are blessed to have him here tonight. He and his wife, Michelle, live locally, and their 4 children are ages 30 to 21. So we are excited to have him. Now, I want to invite Pastor Greg up here to open us with a word of prayer.
Would you stand with me? We certainly welcome the Family Foundation and the candidates and all of you that have come to be a part of this. And I hope that every one of you will really, really be informed as we apply ourselves to. These are days when we need to be in a meeting like this, honestly. So let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this occasion, for the opportunity we have to gather in this place, Lord, to really concentrate and focus our minds on life, on what we're doing here on this planet, and the little time that you've given to us to walk around on this big cemetery and to truly try to glorify you with our lives. We pray, God, that you would truly grant to us wisdom tonight to understand more carefully what you have revealed to us in your eternal word. Help us, God, to understand that apart from you, it's all insignificant. It's in you that we live and move and have our being, and apart from you, life is simply a riddle, a question mark. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to be an exclamation point as we understand your will and your plan for our lives. Help all of these candidates as, Lord, as they will discuss the things that are on their heart. May there be a true transparency. And Lord, may there be a help for each of us in understanding what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. For we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Joining us tonight, Jonathan Emord. Jonathan Emord is a constitutional lawyer who graduated from the University of Illinois and DePaul University College of Law. He served as an attorney in the Federal Communications Commission during the Reagan administration, a leading constitutional law and litigation expert. He is the author of 5 critically acclaimed books. He has won more cases against the Food and Drug Administration, congratulations and thank you, in federal court than any other attorney in American history, earning him the nickname FDA Dragon Slayer. He is married to Cheryl E. Morton. They have 2 children, twins Justice and Angelica. They reside in Clifton, Virginia. Chuck Smith is a lawyer, U.S. Marine veteran, hoorah, and a former Navy JAG officer. He joined the U.S. Marines out of high school in 1970 following military service. Chuck attended North Carolina Central University for 6 years, where he obtained 2 degrees, a Bachelor of Science degree in political science and a Juris Doctorate degree in law in 1978. In 1979, Chuck was commissioned a U.S. Navy legal officer, where he served for 26 years, active, inactive, and reserve service. During his 20-year naval career, he served as a prosecutor, defense counsel, administrative discharge officer, plus a prestigious assignment as a special assistant to a U.S. attorney. After active duty, Chuck opened his own law office and began a legal career that has spanned more than 40 years. Chuck and his wife Edith have 5 children, one of whom is a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. Scott Parkinson. Scott has worked on Capitol Hill for 18 years, working for 3 United States senators before serving as the executive director of the Republican Study Committee. In 2018, Scott was Representative Ron DeSantis' chief of staff, while DeSantis successfully won the governor's race in Florida after serving as DeSantis' deputy executive director of his gubernatorial transition team in Tallahassee. Scott joined the Club for Growth as vice president of government affairs, one of the largest conservative super PACs. Scott resides in Arlington, Virginia with his wife Cortland and their 4 children, Madeline, Paisley, Raylan, and Prescott. The Parkinson family attends Cherrydale Baptist in Arlington. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you. Earlier this evening, it was decided that Mr. Emord would lead off, followed by Mr. Parkinson and Mr. Smith in order. Please begin with 2-minute opening statements. Mr. Emord.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for this great opportunity to appear here today and to address the important issues that we will. Our nation is hanging by a constitutional thread. We are in a state in which the government of the United States has become more of our enemy than our friend in spades. We have a government that is dedicated now to the destruction of much of our lives, liberty, and property. This administration and Tim Kaine is a perfect example of it, no longer defend individual liberty. They don't defend our rights as citizens. In fact, they are allowing us to be pillaged, and they are allowing this whole nation to be pillaged. Open borders. We've got a situation here which is the destruction, a planned destruction, I would say, of the United States, a ruination of our values, a ruination of individual lives. Where is the sympathy? Where is Tim Kaine saying anything in defense of our rights, our lives, our liberty, our property? And so this is true across the board. Destruction of the fossil fuel industry is a destruction of the backbone of the American economy. The whole climate change agenda is an invitation for foreign control through the Chinese creating the windmills and the solar panels and so forth. The open borders is emblematic of allowing foreign people with foreign allegiance to come into this country. We must save our country. We are the last best hope for freedom on earth. We must reverse the direction of this nation and save our country, and the fight to do that is ours. This is not our individual fight. This is our collective fight. We must overcome all obstacles to freedom and progress to save Virginia and save our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. Mr. Parkinson.
Well, I want to start out by thanking our moderator, Delegate Saxman. I want to thank Victoria, Bruce, and Jesse with the Family Foundation, all the sponsors, the Foundation's board, and all of you for showing up on a Saturday afternoon when it's 75 degrees out and sunshine. You could be doing so many other things, but you're here because you believe in participating in the political process to select your Republican nominee to face Tim Kaine. So I'm Scott Parkinson. I'm running against Tim Kaine because I want to stand up for parents and kids. I want to restore public safety in our communities. And I want to expand economic opportunity and unleash a new generation of prosperity. Right now, those 3 things are threatened by a career politician named Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine has been on the ballot 9 times. He served in elected office for 30 years, and he actually votes with Bernie Sanders 94% of the time. I don't think that Virginia can afford 94% of socialism. And so it's time for us as Republicans to fight back and save our constitutional republic. I've got a lot of experience working for 3 U.S. senators, being a senior staffer in the House of Representatives. On day one after I'm sworn in, I can make a difference for each and every single one of you because I know the precedent, the procedure, and the rules that the United States Senate operates under. We know that there's going to be big executive branch and judicial nominations facing President Trump and unified Republican control in Congress. We know that there's going to be expiration of the debt limit. We know that the expiration of the Trump tax cuts also happens in 2025. That's the experience that I bring to the table. And so I would be honored to have all of you support me. Early voting begins May 3rd. God bless you all. I'm looking forward to participating. Thank you so much.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you for coming today. I'll tell you, I was raised by a grandmother who believed in God. She was strong with her faith. She taught me values. I broke her heart one day when I came home after high school and said, "Mama, I've just joined military service." This was in 1970. She cried profusely. She stood up from the garden in tears and began to hug me as hard as she could hug me. I just had to tell her, "Mom, I didn't join the Navy, I joined the Marine Corps." And she nearly screamed. She screamed so loud, it almost burst my drums. I broke her heart, I know that. But the values that she taught me have stayed with me. If my grandmother were living today, she would have me tell you this. I believe in America. I believe in the founding fathers. I believe in God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. I believe in we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. I believe in God bless America, lift every voice and sing, my country 'tis of thee, the battle hymn of the Republic. It is precisely because I believe that you can count on me to stand for America, stand for Virginia, and by the grace of God, come hell or high water, no matter what, stand and endorse Donald J. Trump as the 47th President of the United States of America and never let him down. So help me God. We have to get our country back. We've got to get our values back. I would say, Mama, I am standing strong, I am standing tall. But Tim Kaine is a bear, and we need someone with the experience, with the knowledge, to take that bear down and get our country back. Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Many voters don't really know the Republican candidates for the United States Senate. And I would imagine that most don't know that Senator Tim Kaine is up for re-election for a potential third term in the Senate. In order for the voters here today and watching online via the Family Foundation Facebook feed, please tell us more deeply about your political philosophy and how you align with today's changing Republican Party. Mr. Emord, 1 minute.
I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a person who believes fundamentally in the Constitution of the United States. I've studied my whole life, the intellectual foundations of the Constitution, and I believe very strongly in the limited government, the republic that is created by the Constitution, and the foundational principles that underlie it. They are all under assault today. They are under assault in every respect. We have a government that has gone against us and is not acting in our own behalf, is not protecting our values, is not protecting our faith, is not protecting our rights, is not protecting our liberty, is indeed not even protecting our rights. They have turned people against one another. They pit people against one another based on race, based on economics, and based on fundamental principles. We have got to get back to ensuring the survival and success of our republic. We must insist upon it in law. We must insist upon it in action. We must advocate for it across the nation. This must happen or we will lose it forever.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. Mr. Parkinson, 1 minute.
So I'm a constitutional conservative that believes in a constitutionally limited republic. And what that means to me is that we need to make sure that the federal government protects our God-given rights. We know that the First Amendment was under attack during COVID. When you think about the right to free press, free speech, redress of grievances and petition, the right to peaceably assemble, and then here we are in a church today at Good News Free Will Baptist, and we know that our right to exercise our religious freedom was threatened upon by the federal government during COVID. It's part of why I'm running. We've got to stand up for the First Amendment. We know that Democrats are coming after the Second Amendment as well. There's been a big debate over whether or not we're going to require a warrant for people as they're being surveilled by our intelligence agencies. Then you think about the Sixth Amendment, the right to a speedy trial, and also the Eighth Amendment as it pertains to excessive fines. The Bill of Rights is on the ballot in 2024. I think I'm the best conservative to fight back against Tim Kaine in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Smith.
I've been a Republican all of my life. Imagine that. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, where every house on my street, every street in my neighborhood was a Democrat. I have faith, and I've taken that faith at every single level. The people of Virginia Beach voted me unanimously to be their chairman because they saw in me that faith that not only precedes us, but that keeps us strong in this party. You know, Abraham Lincoln said it best. He said, we're all in this together, but we have to remember that we do not strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. That's me. Raise up the wage earner by tearing down the wage payer. I believe that. Help the poor by destroying the rich, or do for men and women permanently what they can and should do for themselves. I adopt those principles. I have lived those principles. I took it from the Marine Corps. I took it to the Navy JAG Corps. I took it to my law office, and I'm bringing it right now in this election to take down Tim Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I think we're well warmed up, gentlemen, correct? Good, good. Now we're going to begin questions more specific in policy. We'll begin again with Mr. Emord, and then we'll start rotating, okay? Mr. Emord, poll after poll shows that the number one issue in the minds of American voters is immigration. From what you have seen on the campaign trail, do you agree that this is the number one issue on the minds of Virginia voters, and what policies do you support to fix our immigration system?
So without question, immigration is the number one issue because this is a planned destruction of the United States. In October, I was at the border and I saw what was going on firsthand. And I have to tell you this, people do not realize the full extent to which we are in trouble. This is the situation. They are, through human processing centers at the border, they are giving individuals who are asylum seekers, they are signing them up for welfare, signing them up for food stamps, signing them up for Medicaid, signing them up for free education, giving them cash, as much as $3,000 for a family. This is an incentive to get illegal immigration into this country. We have not 9 million illegal aliens, we've got 20 to 30 million. And we have an underground economy that is illegal. We have got to stop this. This is a threat to our survival. We have drug trafficking, sex trafficking, MS-13 gangs, 18th Street gangs. They are preying upon everybody in Virginia. They're part of the reason why we have such an epidemic in crime. If we don't get a handle on this, it will destroy our country.
Mr. Parkinson.
I totally agree. It's the number one issue facing America and facing Virginia right now. We all heard the story in Campbell County about the 32-year-old illegal alien from Venezuela that sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl. Who's going to stand up and fight for border security? Who's going to say that we shouldn't have catch and release into America, but we should have catch and deport policies? We need to reinstate remain in Mexico policies that were actually they were successful underneath President Trump. We know that Joe Biden and Tim Kaine are accommodating this illegal alien invasion because they want to change the fabric of America. But what comes along with it? Fentanyl into all of our communities. We read about the high-profile overdoses in Arlington and Loudoun, all over our communities. And as I speak to the law enforcement community, they know that they're drained by the illegal immigration invasion. They know that our public system, our public school system is also drained. Also public health. We've got to confront these issues. We need to have asylum reform and make sure that there's a real deportation plan in place to get the illegal immigration population out of America.
Mr. Parkinson, Mr. Smith.
You see, I don't believe that the number one issue is immigration. I think the number one issue is an open border, because through that border passes not just illegal immigration, but fentanyl trafficking, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking. If we don't get our border fixed, we cannot continue to call ourselves a nation. We need to have people come through our front door, not our side door. Anytime when people ask me the question, if you have water running in your tub, which is overflowing, what do you do first? Do you turn the water off, or do you unplug the socket? I say you do both. We must shut down all immigration into this country until we get our border fixed. If we're going to have a nation, we need to stop making our states border states. We need to protect life, and one of the ways to do that is to stop people who are coming across our border illegally.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. A follow-up question, if I can, and then we'll go in the order of Mr. Parkinson and Mr. Emord. In 2018, I interviewed both Senator Tim Kaine, Republican nominee for Senate, Corey Stewart. Corey Stewart was running as an aggressive anti-immigration candidate, and since he is an immigration attorney, I asked him what he would do to solve the immigration problem. This was 2018, 6 years ago. Stewart answered that he would, in part, double legal immigration from 1 million a year to 2 million a year. You mentioned the front door. Is that something you could support?
Do I understand the question that he would double legal immigration?
Legal immigration. From yes, from 1 million to 2 million.
I am not in favor of doubling legal immigration or any immigration until we get our border fixed. I know Corey, I've supported him, I endorsed him. But we cannot have a policy where we continue to allow people coming in this country through our side door, through our back door, causing crime, killing people. We're giving them driver's licenses. There's something called the United States Constitution, and it protects the people in this country. And how can we protect them if we're going to have more immigration on top of what used to be 11 million, now 20 million illegal people who are in the United States? And get this. I believe there are a lot of people in this country, not just people who are legal in the country, but people who are trying to be legal in this country. They want people to do what they did, stand in line, come through the front door. One of the things we do in my office is that we make sure that everybody who comes to my office for an immigration issue, all of their information is given to the federal government. You cannot have a system where people do not want to come into the United States legally.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Parkinson.
Listen, with respect to Mr. Stewart's position, I disagree. I think that 6 years later, the circumstances have dramatically shifted on the border, and it's because of President Biden's policies compared to what President Trump had in 2018. It's just a different circumstance. Of course, we need merit-based legal immigration, but that should be limited to needs of the economy. And right now, our economy is being overrun, and the federal welfare, anti-poverty welfare benefit programs are all being overrun by the illegal immigrant population. So when it comes to how many illegals we allow into America, I think that we need to maintain or even reduce current levels until we get a grip on the illegal alien invasion on the southern border first.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Emord.
There should be no number set. What we need to do with legal immigration is ensure that those who are coming into this country will actually provide economic value, will be loyal to the United States, will defend our interests, will support the rule of law, and do not have a criminal history. We have to ensure that people of integrity are allowed into this country and not criminals. When it comes to the border situation, to disallow criminals, what we need to do, first of all, is to change the asylum laws so that no one can put 1 foot into the United States and seek asylum. If you seek asylum, you should have to do so in your country of origin U.S. Embassy or an adjacent U.S. Embassy, but not in the United States. And if you come into this country illegally, you should be deported, but you should also permanently be denied U.S. citizenship.
Okay. Leading immigration, do you have a question for one of your colleagues? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next question to Mr. Parkinson. Inflation is regarded as the second most important issue on the minds of voters. Economist Milton Friedman said inflation was the cruelest tax. The Biden administration said inflation would be transitory. But clearly, at least to those who buy groceries, it is anything but transitory. What are the policies that you support to bring down the cruelest tax, Mr. Parkinson?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. First of all, we need to recognize that there is 19.4% inflation just since Joe Biden became president. And that is the hidden tax on the middle class. It's about 60 days out of the year that's gone in earning power. And so what are we going to do in terms of policies to stop the inflationary period that we're experiencing right now? 3.5% on an annualized basis, well above the benchmark from the Federal Reserve of 2%. We have to stop printing money. We have printed over $7 trillion since COVID started. And all that is on top of the baseline and the annual deficits, the trillion-dollar deficits that we were already incurring. And so we know that the deficit spending right now in Washington, D.C. is crippling the middle class. Here in Virginia, the average household pays $12,230 more, and that's just underneath the Biden-Kane policies. But I'm not an average household because I'm not 2.6 people. I'm a family of 6. For me, it's a heck of a lot more, like $25,000 a year, which means I get to pay $100,000 more for Joe Biden and Tim Kaine's policies than I did 4 years ago underneath Donald Trump. So it also starts with replacing Joe Biden with Donald Trump as president.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Smith.
So my grandmother, who had an 11th grade education, spoke about her earlier. She did something which I think Americans all should do, and that is live within our means. We cannot have consistently the tax and spend policies of a government that turns around and prints money to live beyond our means. The inflation is where you have more products than you have money to pay for those products. And so I think we should get back to a time where we, as a Republican Party, are practicing and producing and preaching and teaching fiscal responsibility. Remember that? We as Republicans believe in fiscal responsibility. That's one of the ways to get us out of inflation. Stop the policies that drive inflation, that drive the need to print money. You cannot cover debt by printing money. We have to have policies in this country where our elected officials are living with, they are producing bills and they're passing laws that make us live within our means.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Emord.
Inflation is a result of too many dollars chasing too few goods. And what we have right now is a massive climate change agenda that's costing us over $1 trillion a year and is adding to the national debt massively. We've got to repeal the climate change agenda completely. We also have to eliminate regulatory strictures that exist now and prohibitions that exist now on the production of oil and gas. And we need to incentivize the jobbers to get back into oil and gas production. We got to lower the price of gas. We need to get it down to $2 a gallon. We need to lower the cost of groceries by reducing inflation as a result of government spending, and we also need to grow the economy. If we grow the economy, that'll also reduce inflation. This will also reduce interest rates. How do we grow the economy? We need to create a reduction in corporate taxes. We need a reduction in individual taxes. We need to have a flat tax that kicks in at 10% when you earn $200,000 a year or more, not less. This will create an economic boom in this country. It will give us opportunity, it'll give us jobs, and it'll also help reduce inflation because we will be paying off the national debt through taxes.
Okay. Third question goes to Mr. Smith. This afternoon, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to provide funding for the defense of Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. I'm sure you've been following this debate. Do you approve this funding? Why or why not?
I do not approve of any funding to Ukraine. We as Americans have no dog in that fight. Many of you may remember the Bay of Pigs, where Kennedy told Khrushchev that you will not put missiles in the Western Hemisphere, and we're prepared to go to war over that. I think Donald Trump had it right. When Donald Trump was president, there wasn't an uprising of Russia because he recognized that all Russia wanted was not to have NATO in its backyard. But at the same time, I think we've got to recognize that you have to have a policy where Americans protect Americans who are killed, who are harmed in Israel. Even though we should continue our support for Israel, we also have a dog in that fight. We have Americans that were killed. We have Americans that were held captive. And I think it's our responsibility, not go to war, but it's our responsibility to help Israel defend itself.
Mr. Emord.
So in the case of Israel, we have Israel as our first line of defense against terrorism around the world. Israel is an ally that is indispensable to our own national interest. That must be the standard. What is in our national interest? It is in our national interest to support Israel. In the case of the Ukraine, it is in our national interest to deal with Russia, but it's not in our national interest to dump hundreds of billions of dollars into a bottomless pit with virtually no accountability into the Ukraine. We should not be protecting the world's borders and not protecting our own. Our own have to be protected first. Having said that, what do we need to do to solve this problem? It's not dump hundreds of billions in. It's to replace Russia as the source of liquefied natural gas to Europe, so we deplete their ability to finance the war. 98% of Russian income comes from Europe. We need to be energy independent, an exporter, profit from our exportation of oil and gas, and build our nation's own national security as a result.
Okay. Mr. Parkinson.
You know, it was just a week ago on Saturday.
Hold on a second. Would you have supported the legislation that passed out of the House?
I would not, as it stands.
You would have voted. Okay, no. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
And that vote will be in the Senate on Tuesday. If I was U.S. Senator on Tuesday, I would vote no against the package. It consolidated 4 different bills, including money for Ukraine and money for Israel, and it honestly convolutes the entire process. So when you think about what happened a week ago in Israel, you have Iran sending unmanned drones and missiles are coming across. What happened is exactly what should have happened. It pertains to their missile defense system and the Iron Dome. And what happened also is exactly how it should have happened with an international coalition that helped shoot everything down from the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and other people. We need to make sure that we have Israel's back. And there are ways to do that without just putting it on the back of the U.S. taxpayer. This was a $95 billion piece of legislation that was totally unpaid for. And it's been a big, big thing trying to get this Ukraine funding through. It's basically the Chuck Schumer bill that went over to the House, and they used Israel as a political wedge to push the bill through. And I think that's exactly how the bill will go through on Tuesday afternoon. I would vote no.
Okay. I believe I heard the topic of fiscal responsibility come up. I know Mr. Smith brought it up, but it's Mr. Emord's time for the question. You've brought up the issue, and very few seem willing to discuss the federal deficit and the national debt. And we mentioned this in the context of expenditures for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. Last year, payments on the national debt exceeded federal outlays for Medicaid, health care for the poor. This year, for the first time, we are paying more in interest than each of Medicare and the national defense. Mr. Parkinson's website calls it fiscal insanity. Is he right? And what should we do about it, Mr. Emord?
Yes, he's right. It is fiscal insanity. We have a $34 trillion national debt. Within the next 7 years, it may be $60 trillion. And we have got to fix this problem if we are to survive. Let me tell you, the reserve currency of the world now is the dollar, but we are losing that status, and we will definitely lose it over the next several years unless we get our economic house in order. What does that mean? That means that your interest rates on everything are going to go through the roof. It means that we are going to suffer as a people like you have never seen in this country. So what do? We need to substantially reduce the size and scope of the federal government. We need to repeal the climate change agenda, which is adding $1 trillion a year. We also need to eliminate the Department of Education, eliminate the Department of Commerce, eliminate the Department of Energy, eliminate the Federal Trade Commission, substantially privatize the entire Federal Communications Commission ownership of the airways. They never should have been owned by the government to begin with. And we need to use the revenue derived from the privatization to go directly to the national debt. We have got to get control over this national debt, or it will consume us, it will transform us, and the Chinese will replace us in the world.
I understand you think you're correct on your website, Mr. Parkinson. Would you like to expand on that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. $34.6 trillion is where the national debt stands. When I came to Washington 18 years ago as a young staffer, it was less than $10 trillion. And the way that Washington, D.C. is coming together with these trillion-dollar deficits really concerns me about the future of the economy for my kids. We know right now that deficit spending is exceeding our national defense and Medicare and Medicaid, as you mentioned. And how are we going to get a grip on that? We've got to have a balanced budget balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. We've got to make sure that we've got a plan in place to grow the economy. There's a group called the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and they talk about the 10,000 commandments, the regulatory burden facing our economy. It's about $2 trillion. So we need to deregulate. Of course, we need to cut taxes in a pro-growth, efficient way to unleash a new generation of prosperity, and that includes investment taxation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Smith.
Not only do I think it's fiscal insanity, and I would agree with Mr. Parkinson, I'd also agree with what Mr. Emort said, but in addition to that, I also think it's insanity to continue to pay for illegal immigrants coming into this country, filling up our hospitals, filling up our schools, taking away American jobs, and a government funding all of this. You know, there's something called the Constitution, which is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. The government is supposed to have only that much power that we specifically give to it. It says in the 10th Amendment, all power not specifically given to the federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states, remains with the people and to the states. We've gotten far away from that. We have a government that's trying to be everything to everybody. Trump even said, we are not the world's policemen. We can't continue these foreign wars. We have no place in these foreign wars. We need to rein in our national debt, and we do that by eliminating a lot of the programs that this federal government has taken its responsibility of paying.
Let's get specific on this, because every time Republicans talk about spending cuts, it never seems to happen. And I think that's one of the problems that the Republican Party from within, the base, gets frustrated with. It's a lot of talk, it just never happens. Specifically, what will you do to rein in spending as a United States Senator? Mr. Smith.
I'd get rid of a lot of the people who were elected against their campaign promises. One of the problems you're having in a Republican Party is that people say they're going to do stuff and then turn around and don't do it. That builds up the credibility issue against them. If we're going to have candidates running for office, if we're going to have Republicans being Republicans, then why are we participating in anything which is not, in this particular case, fiscal responsibility? You have a situation right now where abortion, which I know is not a political issue, is no longer a federal issue, but abortion passes in the General Assembly every single year. How does that happen? It passed when we held the governor's mansion. It passed when we held the lieutenant governor's office. It passed when we held the House of Delegates, and it also passed when we held the state Senate seat, all of them at the same time. How does that happen? We need Republicans to restore what's called credibility, and we need to have Republicans voting on issues which they promised in their campaigns.
Mr. Emort.
We need to repeal the climate change agenda, and that's over $1 trillion a year, and it's a massive burden on the economy, and it's a regulatory burden as well. We need to bring back an actual budget process. The Appropriations Clause of the Constitution requires a budget process. We haven't actually had one until from 1996 forward. We've been passing everything with continuing resolutions. That has got to come to an end. It's a violation of the Constitution, and it has to come to an end. In addition to that, we need to devolve to the states most of the functions that are performed now on the federal level, and we need to eliminate several departments and agencies of the government. So as I mentioned, get rid of the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, as well as the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and substantially deregulate the Federal Communications Commission. There are so many agencies, and I don't have enough time, but the focus must be on substantial reduction in the size and scope of the federal government to liberate us so that we're not burdened by regulation, and so that we have a free enterprise economy that functions without the crippling restraints of federal regulatory action.
Thank you. Mr. Parkinson.
I mentioned earlier that the debt limit expires in January of 2025. That'll be the same month after we're sworn in. And as U.S. Senator, I'm going to work very, very hard on a new spending deal, on a budget deal that actually restrains spending. We've got to roll back spending levels prior to the COVID levels of 2020. And we also need to make sure that we've got pro-growth reforms that are affiliated with that as well. House conservatives tried to do that with Limit, Save, Grow last year. And Kevin McCarthy rolled them under the bus and passed something called the Fiscally Responsible Act with Democrats and most of the senators. That was anything but fiscally responsible. All it did was exacerbate our debt and deficit problem. And we're experiencing it today. We're about to have $1 trillion more in deficit spending over the next 100 days. It's completely outrageous. I know the precedent and procedure as a U.S. Senator, and I'm going to block and filibuster legislation that doesn't roll back the spending to prior to COVID levels.
Gentlemen, one of the largest issues that never seems to get talked about, and it's the largest segments of the federal budget, are entitlements. I think Mr. Parkinson's organization has it on its website as entitlement reform. I didn't go deeply into it, but I saw it on your website. Mr. Emord, talk specifically about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Both candidates of the two major parties have dismissed touching Social Security and Medicare. How do we balance the budget? How do we fund the programs that are necessary in this country, defending the nation, if we can't get a hold of our entitlement spending? 1 minute, please.
So we have promised the American people, that we will have Medicare and Medicaid, and we've promised them Social Security, and we've made them pay into it, and we've made them do this year after year. That promise must not be broken. I don't believe in making promises and breaking promises. I believe in fulfilling promises. So what does that mean? That means that we have to reduce the cost of government elsewhere, and it also means this. We need to grow the economy, and we also need to encourage private charity. We've got a government that thinks it needs to be a government in every respect for every issue and every problem. We are a free people only because we're independent. We need to be independent of the federal government as much as possible. What does that mean? That means that we need to have tax incentives for example, just give you one example. Physicians supplying medical care to the indigent, to reduce the cost on government by having them do that based on tax deductions predicated upon their willingness to supply indigent people free medical care or substantially reduced cost medical care. This is the method by which we use the tax code, to ensure that we provide benefits that are necessary for the indigent without having government pay for it and without having the rest of us carry the burden.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. Mr. Parkinson.
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say is President Trump hasn't said anything about not touching Medicaid. And Medicaid has grown in its expenses because of the Medicaid expansion underneath Obamacare. I think that we should repeal Obamacare and restore free market choice and competition in the health insurance marketplace. And there's also over 100 other anti-poverty welfare benefit programs that we should have work requirements in. And when I say work requirements, it means that you need to be an able-bodied person that is working. And if you're not, you're in work activation programs that are teaching you new skills. And there's so many skills that are needed, skills obtainment that's necessary down in Hampton Roads as it pertains to shipbuilding. And all throughout Northern Virginia, if you're a plumber or an electrician, these are the types of skills that we can teach people where they're employable. And so I want to work with President Trump to make sure that we've got work requirements in our anti-poverty welfare benefit programs. And then I think that he'd actually be open to the idea of preserving the promise of Social Security, but also giving younger people an option to invest their own payroll taxes into private accounts. That's a good idea that actually expands retirement security for more Americans than ever before. And we know that Social Security is insolvent as it stands right now. In 2033, there will be a 20% across-the-board cut if we do nothing. That's what's unacceptable for our seniors.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Smith.
How do we take Social Security off the table when we promise so many Americans that they would have it, that they've paid into the system? How is that done? Again, if we want to find money, let's stop the illegal immigration which is flooding our homes and our schools. If we want to find money, let's put an end to the pointless foreign wars. If we want to find money, let's get rid of some of the agencies that are not doing their jobs. Get rid of the Department of Education. Get rid of the FBI. Turn it into something else. Revamp it. We cannot target American citizens through our government agencies and expect Americans to continue believing that there is integrity in those agencies. There is money to be found. We do not have to defund Social Security. We do not have to defund Medicaid. What we have to do is stop the incessant resort to programs that are bankrolling the United States government. For example, those people who are coming here illegally, who's paying for their hospital bills? Who's paying for their children to be in schools? We are. And you want to reduce the national debt. There are plenty of ways to do it without eliminating Social Security.
So just to sum up, we're not touching Social Security as far as benefits, age, eligibility. We're not touching payroll tax increases for those who cap out at, I think it's 145,000. We're not going to raise those, or we're not going to add any years to the to when benefits start. We're not going to do any of that. Does anyone have an idea on those actuarially? Go ahead, pull a hand up here.
Yeah, I'm not going to do anything for people that are 55 years or older, right? That's the promise of Social Security for people that are close to obtaining that program and the benefit. But I do think for younger people, I'm the youngest candidate in the race, I'm 41 years old, and I'd be comfortable with an age increase. I think that you could gradually increase it like our program's history has in the past. Social Security, I think, was 1928. And obviously, life expectancy has dramatically increased since then. And there were gradual increases in the retirement age over the last 20 years. So I'd be comfortable with that for younger people like me, but not for seniors at all. And that's why I think that there needs to be the option for privatizing Social Security accounts for people that want to do it.
Okay.
100% against touching Social Security. 100%. Period.
Okay.
And I agree with Chuck. We're not going to touch it. People have been promised it, and we're not going to put the weight of the government and its abuses and its excessive spending on the backs of seniors. We're not going to do that.
Well, well, regardless of the answers, I'd just like to see some disagreement every once in a while, so that it was good. Thank you.
Well, would the moderator let me pose a question through him for my dear friends on my left?
Which one would you like to?
I'd be comfortable if you address it to either of them, but the fact of the matter is, if we do nothing in 2033, less than 10 years from now, there's an automatic 20% cut. That's why you have to do reforms. Visit the Social Security Actuary's website. If we do nothing in Medicare, by 2026, that program will be insolvent as well. And what I think is unacceptable is doing nothing, sitting on our hands like all these career politicians have done. So the question is, would they really not do anything and allow for a 20% cut across the board in 2033?
I'll go in alphabetical order to Mr. Emord first.
Yeah, I think that's a false paradigm. And the reason why I say that is that really what we're talking about is the allocation of resources within the federal government. And as I mentioned before, I think there's a way to reduce the stress on the system, and that is by incentivizing through tax deductions private enterprise to pick up these things like areas where people are indigent and need medical treatment, and to replace Obamacare, and also to reduce the stress on the system. You know, Medicare is really a wretched system, to tell you the truth. But it is a system nonetheless that has been promised. And we need to complement that with not only the accounts that were mentioned by my colleague here for individuals entering the Social Security system so that they can have tax-deductible savings accounts and so forth if they invest in the market, but also for people of all ages so that we can have private sector alternatives that are incentivized. That's the way to reduce the stress. But ultimately, we have to grow the economy, no matter what it is. We're looking at a $60 trillion national debt in 7 years. We have to grow the economy, and that means reduction in regulation, and that means reduction in taxation, and that means bringing overseas businesses back to this country, and that means a free enterprise economy that's vibrant. And we can do that if we get rid of government regulations that are stifling the economy.
Mr. Smith, to Mr. Parkinson's question.
Yes, I think somewhere the answer lies within the question. Mr. Parkinson said his dear friends. That doesn't change my mind. We're friends. But friendship should not be the basis upon which we lie to the American people. We say one thing and do something else. If we need money, let's not take it out of the entitlement programs. People have paid into that system. 100% against touching Social Security. We can find money in other sources.
Okay. We ready to move on from entitlements? It was getting kind of fun.
I would just note that all you got to do is check the Social Security website, and it will tell you that there's an automatic 20% cut for seniors if we do nothing. That's what I oppose. I want to protect Social Security and Medicare for our senior population.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson.
Let's find the money in other sources.
Okay, Mr. Smith, one at a time. If you want to have a statement, please raise your hand. Then we don't want. Thank you. Mr. Smith, go right ahead. We just want to keep it orderly, that's all. I want to make sure you're heard.
And to be fair, you gave us those instructions. I wasn't trying to violate your rules, but
You're a Marine. We appreciate that. I get it. My son-in-law is a Marine, Sergeant E5. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, the days of lying to people, the days of saying one thing and doing something else, those ships have sailed.
Trust, the trust issue.
Yeah. Yes.
America's a trust issue.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say. One of the areas in which you all agree on your websites is the area, and strongly agree, is the area of term limits. I think you all support 6 years in the House total, 3 2-year terms, and 2 6-year terms in the Senate for 12 years. 2 questions related to term limits. Why the longer term for the office you are seeking? And will you pledge only to serve 12 years if elected, regardless of whether there is a legal limit or not? Mr. Parkinson, to you.
Yeah, so on day 1 of my campaign, April 3rd, 2023, I signed the U.S. Term Limits Pledge. And the pledge says that you will co-sponsor the constitutional amendment to provide for term limits on members of Congress. And as the moderator points out, that pledge calls for 3 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate, and no longer limit. And so right now, we've got career politicians like Tim Kaine. Joe Biden was elected to the U.S. Senate at the age of 29. You got Nancy Pelosi that was elected in her late 40s, I believe, or early 50s, but now she's in her 80s. So Steny Hoyer, Mitch McConnell. I think that you need to look at people like this that are completely ruining our economy, and they are consolidating power at the top. I have no intention of serving longer than 12 years. I think that you could get a lot done in 12 years. I don't understand why these career politicians don't get anything done.
Mr. Smith.
I don't know why this requires a long answer at all. Term limits protect the freshness and the alertness of our elected people. These jobs are not homesteading jobs. People get there and they stay there and they stay there, and it becomes stale. I think the American people deserve to have fresh minds. And that's why I supported the term limits bill, and that's why I would encourage my colleagues also to support it.
Mr. Eward?
Yes, I signed the U.S. Term Limits Pledge for a constitutional amendment to impose these term limits, and the reason is simple. Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. Do you need more of an explanation of what career politicians can do? Okay, Tim Kaine. Career politicians are corrupt by definition. The Founding Fathers intended for this country to have individuals sacrifice to go into the service of their country and go back to their homes and go back to their businesses. The declamation of power is George Washington's example. He gave up power rather than assume power. He resigned his commission in the military. He didn't become a dictator in this country. These people want careers out of their service. They want us to pay for everything. They want us to give them, treat them like kings and live like paupers. This is unacceptable. We need term limits. People need to serve. They don't need to make careers out of the service.
Okay, if I can go back to the 2 questions I posed. Why the longer term for the office you are seeking? And will you pledge to serve only 12 years if elected, regardless of whether there's a legal limit or not? I'll go back to you, Mr. Parkinson.
Yeah, the reason that I support that pledge is because it is the most popular and likely pledge on term limits to actually get signed into law. You guys might remember from 1994, when Newt Gingrich proposed a contract with America, there was a term limits pledge there. The problem in 1995 was that they allowed like 6 different votes on various lengths of term limits, so none of them passed, and all these politicians got to point back and say, well, of course I support term limits, just not the limit that my friend over here supports, and just not that one, but this one. That is politicians talking out of both sides of their mouth. I think that we need to build consensus. There is, I believe it's H.J. Res 11 in the House of Representatives, and then in Senate with Ted Cruz. That's the bill that most of the Republicans are co-sponsoring. I think it has consensus. That's why I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Emord.
Yes, of course, I will live by that term limits pledge. I will not serve in the Senate of the United States for more than 12 years. And in addition, I think that it is important to recognize that there is a balancing act that U.S. term limits did that I think was fair. If a person is indispensable in the Senate, is the constitutional conscience, or is otherwise indispensable, and they've come into the Senate in their first 6 years and have established that, we may want them to serve longer. But certainly not making it 30, 40, 50 years, like has turned these people into career politicians who are corrupt and who don't care about us and think that we are their servants rather than them being our servants. So the real thing is finding that right point. I think 12 years is about right as a maximum for the Senate, and I think the reason is that you need to have these specialized individuals be able to serve. But I would be comfortable with 7, 8 years, 6 years. I mean, I really think that we have to come up with a limitation. The U.S. term limits did the Balancing Act and basically determined that this is what could pass, and so I'm in favor of that. We want to pass it.
Okay,
Limits.
Mr. Smith.
Let me go out on a limb here and say that the Founding Fathers gave us this model that we have, where the United States Congress reported back to the people in 2 years more often. And as you know, the United States Congress, the accession from the Speaker goes to, or the Speaker's the third in line to be president. The Senate, not so. The Senate deals with a lot of other issues that the Congress doesn't. For example, the confirmation of appointments. I think, yes, I will support the 2-term limit. I believe it is necessary. I believe it's necessary because the Founding Fathers put that in our Constitution and gave it to us for no other reason.
A lot of this goes to well-intended, the argument of passing legislation. This is what they came up with. But from a moral standpoint, there's a very strong movement to get to term limits. Should current U.S. House and Senate members not seek re-election if they exceed those limits? Should that be imposed from the party within? Mr. Emord?
I certainly think that competence, mental competence, as well as the degree to which someone is engaged in corrupt activities ought to be a basis for exclusion. And by the way, the Oath and Affirmation Clause of the Constitution requires that people support the Constitution by oath in order to be seated and vote. And we have individuals like AOC, Bernie Sanders, and others who are avowed socialists, and frankly, they should not be able to vote because the Constitution itself excludes someone who does not support the Constitution. But the point is that we need to be able to limit individuals, and what we need to do, without a constitutional amendment, we can't enforce it, but what we can do is have the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader impose these restrictions through tight controls and to ensure that there is greater integrity in Congress. Integrity matters. We must ensure that the standards are higher for members of Congress in their service.
Mr. Smith, should we, as a people, or should y'all as fellow politicians, colleagues, many of you take endorsements from candidates who are office holders who have been there for more than 12 years. Should you turn and say, Mr. Cruz, your time is up? Mr. Kane, it's easy to say it for the Democratic Party. Is it not easy for the Republican Party, Mr. Smith?
So you see, I think that when someone gives their word, when someone makes a statement, they should live by that. Again, our founders gave us the Constitution where people can serve until they decided that they shouldn't serve. Is it for the people then to force them out of office based on the pledge that they've made? That's your question. You see, I don't think we need new laws. I think we need to enforce the laws that we've got in every stage. And so if someone stands up here today and says, I will retire after my second term, we should be able to hold that person accountable. We don't need to make a law, another law on top of all the laws that we have. There are a number of ways to get rid of corrupt people out of office, but I'm not so sure that we need a law to hold people to their honesty. If candidates are not honest, they should not be elected to office to start with.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Parkinson.
So the Supreme Court has looked at the issue of term limits in the past. And I think that this is a fascinating question that you've posed to us, because I believe that the court would say that it would start on ratification of the constitutional amendment and then move forward. And if it took 12 years for us to get term limits in place on people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, I think that that's worth it. They just need to equally apply to everybody. So I'm not for grandfathering in the current members to not have term limits apply to them, but I do think that 12 years from now, if they applied to everybody equally, that would be fantastic with me.
Okay, let's move on to the economy. We'll have one question, then we'll go to a break. 5-minute break after this question. To Mr. Smith. Two candidates reference on their website seemingly strong support for the free market, free enterprise, and/or free trade, long-held positions by the Republican Party. More recently, the economic policy of the GOP seems to have shifted to more protectionism. What is the best way to grow the American economy? Mr. Smith.
I think so many people have said it before. Donald Trump even said it. We need to let the free market make that decision. We need to stop injecting our preferences and our beliefs into affecting how the free market functions. If we allow people to buy what they want, when they want, where they want, feed their families how they want, when they want, how they think they should be fed, I think that's the best determiner for the economy. We cannot have a vibrant economy by having regulation after regulation after regulation. The free market must be the determiner.
Mr. Emord.
We need to encourage the return of manufacturing to the United States. We have about 98% of our drugs are made in communist China. They have the stranglehold capability there to really do a number on us, and of course they could. So what we need to do is to return those through tax policy that reduces the tax, corporate tax, so much so that it incentivizes the return of business to this country and make those tax reductions contingent on that return. We need to expand the marketplace in this country. Also, we need to understand that economic policy needs to be directed against enemies of the United States like China. They're occupying our farmlands. They're buying up our farmlands, CBP-related entities and individuals, and they're taking them over. We cannot tolerate that. We cannot tolerate CCP-owned companies within the United States and infiltration within our companies in the United States. We have got to deal with that, and if that requires restricting China or imposing tariffs on China, we have got to do it. They are an enemy of the United States. That's the difference.
Thank you. Mr. Parkinson.
So your question is, what's the best way to grow the economy? And I think that the best way to grow the economy is through freedom and liberty. And that means that we need to have free market economic policies in place that wipe out distortions and pick winners and losers in the tax code or the regulatory scheme placed on businesses and job creators. We know right now that people are being stifled because they want to innovate, but the Biden regime and Tim Kaine want to put more onerous regulations on top of what exists today. We see that years and years ahead in time. And the way that they do it is they basically write legislation and it says the secretary shall promulgate regulations to conform with sections 101 through 404. And that is abdicating our legislative responsibility from Article 1 over to an overpowered executive branch that is completely dominating the American economy. So what I want to see are free market economic conservative policies in place, especially as it pertains to job creators, and you do that through free trade, low taxes, and low regulation.
Free trade versus protectionist policies against China. How do you square that one, Mr. Parkinson?
Listen, I said I'm a free market economic conservative. I oppose the distortions in the marketplace. President Trump and Club for Growth had the same end-game goal, a zero-zero tariff policy. And whether or not you're going to lay tariffs on somebody that cheats and manipulates the market, I think that we can actually become more competitive with China if we cut the corporate rate, if we cut our regulations that are creating these advantages for labor in China. That's how you compete in a free market system.
Mr. Emord?
China is an enemy of the United States and is exploiting every weakness that they can find in our free society to their advantage. We have to recognize that they are an enemy, that they are dedicated to our destruction, and that they are working actively to achieve it within our country. We cannot allow China, through CCP agents in particular, to infiltrate our business, to infiltrate our economy, and to destroy it from within. And so we must impose sanctions on China. We must make it difficult for China to function, the CCP, in our marketplace. And that is a national security priority that we cannot overrule. We must defend our nation.
Mr. Smith.
Donald Trump did a very good job when he was president without doing any of this. Donald Trump made other countries in the world respect the United States. He made China respect the United States. We didn't have the Obama policies when Donald Trump was in office. We weren't given millions of dollars to places like Iran. We were not taking a back seat to other countries. In fact, Donald Trump said, where the Statue of Liberty, give us your tired, give us your poor. Donald Trump says, and I totally support this, he said, give us your best. Let's take the best people and bring the best people in to the United States. When you're talking about China, China is doing everything it can to undercut not just United States policies, but United States programs. I mean, when we see balloons flying over the sky, that's a message there. When we see them taking, or supporting universities or giving money down to the Panama Canal, there's a message there. And I think candidates for the United States Senate need to recognize that.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a 5-minute break. Appreciate that. I believe the next question, we'll start out with Mr. Smith, then Mr. Emord, then Mr. Parkinson. Another area of Republican policy that seems to be shifting is on the issue of abortion. Leading Republicans, from Governor Glenn Youngkin to former President Donald Trump, support a 15-week ban on abortion with exceptions. Yet almost 95% of abortions occurs before that limit, and half of those, more than half of those, are performed by medication. 2 questions on abortion. Is a 15-week ban on abortion a pro-life position? And do you support legislation at the federal level to restrict abortions? And at what week of gestation would you support? Mr. Smith.
So I believe the first trimester belongs to mom. The last trimester belongs to the child. And we're arguing about the part in the middle. Before I finish the answer, let me say that we have kicked abortion now to the state, so it really is not a federal issue. If you're asking me personally how I feel, that's what I'm going to answer. But as United States Senator, we don't expect that issue to come up to us outside of the area of funding. I am pro-life. I am 100% pro-life. There are no exceptions. I think that from the point of inception, the child is viable. And that's the personal position that I take. And I have no exceptions to that.
Mr. Emord.
The rule of law is Dobbs. Dobbs has left it to the states to determine the outcome of that question. We're running for federal office, and therefore we should honor the Constitution. Is Dobbs consistent with the Constitution? Yes. Did Dobbs correctly overrule Roe v. Wade? Yes. The Founding Fathers never intended the issue of abortion to be dealt with by the federal government. And in fact, abortion was known to the founders, and they left it to the states. So it will be dealt with by the states. That's the reality. The Constitution requires it, and so does Dobbs. And we cannot change that. We should honor it because the Founding Fathers have made that determination. And if you want to change the Constitution, you can amend under Article 5. But you cannot change the Constitution through unilateral action. So, on the state level then, what is the answer? What is my position about the states and what should be done? You know, I'm pro-life. I believe that life begins at conception. But I'll tell you this, though. When it comes to the reality, the real politics here, we lost an election and we have Democrat control. I would say more, but let me just say that this red, you want to say more? Okay, I'll say a little more. So on this point, I want to say this. We have this turned into a political football. It shouldn't be. We should be compassionate, and we should also be scientific. And what do I mean by that? We need to reintroduce adoption as an answer, and everywhere. It needs to be ubiquitous so that every single woman has adoption as a serious alternative. It's not just abortion. It's not just taking care of a child your whole life. If you don't want to take care of that child for whatever reason, you should have immediate option of adoption, and that is not available today because of all the regulatory restraints.
We'll come back to this.
All right.
I'm going to get to Mr. Parkinson and make sure our time is allotted fairly. Thank you.
The Democrats have been attacking me as a pro-life, conservative, MAGA extremist. I think that Tim Kaine is the extremist, along with our former governor, Governor Ralph Northam. They're the ones that support this extreme position of abortion up to birth and even after birth. I was there for the birth of my 4 children, each of my daughters and my son. It was an awesome miracle of life, and they are all created in God's image. So I am a pro-life conservative, and I'm going to take the fight directly to Tim Kaine because he's the extremist. And I'm also going to take it to the Democrats that think that we should continue to have federal funding for Planned Parenthood so Planned Parenthood can help people have abortions. We need to make sure that we confront the Democrats for their positions. That means going on offense. And for far too long, conservatives and Republicans have been on defense. The Dobbs case does say that abortion shall be returned to the people's elected representatives. Maybe that means we're going to have a different position in Virginia compared to New York or Oklahoma or California or Alabama. But the bottom line is, I'm a pro-life conservative, and I'm going to take the fight to Tim Kaine for his extreme positions.
If I can get back to the question. The question was, 15 weeks seems to be the new standard that Governor Glenn Youngkin ran on or campaigned on in the midterms, his gubernatorial midterms, and President Trump has indicated more recently that he would be supportive of a 15-week ban as well. Is that a pro-life position, Mr. Smith?
I do not think it is. But you know, and I know you're trying to get on with this, but I think it's extremely important that we hear what's being said, because this is an excellent area for the general election where we have an opportunity to say one thing and then say something different in the general election. What we say here today, we should be prepared to say in the general election. We're looking to beat Tim Kaine, and this is going to be where they're going to lead out with. And my position is, life begins at conception. There are no exceptions to that.
Mr. Emord.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Is the 15-week ban that was proposed by Governor Glenn Youngkin in the gubernatorial midterms, and more recently by former President Donald Trump in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, where are we going to draw the lines? Where should the states draw the lines? It doesn't seem like y'all want to support a federal ban or support a federal law. You want to leave it to the states completely, which is consistent with Dobbs. But now we're talking about 15 weeks. 93% of abortions occur before that. Is 15 weeks a pro-life position?
No. Life begins at conception.
Mr. Parkinson?
So I think the point is that I'm going to be a pro-life vote, and if something decreases the number of abortions, I will vote yes on that. The bottom line is President Trump, I think, actually changed his position even a little bit differently over the last month or so when he said that he supported the 3 exceptions at the federal level, but that he wanted the states to determine the number of weeks. We did have an election here last November. Republicans were outspent 20-1 on this issue, and we still barely lost. So we need to fight for life. I'm a pro-life conservative, and I'm proud of that position.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Next question will go to Mr. Parkinson. Of all the candidates here today, there's also something else you share in common. You're all dads. Thank you. I myself have 4 children, along with my wife, of course. I had to put that one in. Fatherlessness is, in my estimation, the greatest underreported issue in America. Here's why. Children raised without fathers are twice as likely to drop out of school, have lower grades, lower scores on standardized tests, and lower educational aspirations. Children without fathers are more likely to have behavioral problems like aggression, delinquency, difficult controlling emotions, and are twice as likely to be involved in criminal behavior. Fatherless children are more likely to experience poverty and economic instability and have lower levels of economic mobility and higher unemployment rates as adults. Children raised without fathers are more likely to suffer from depression, obesity, substance abuse issues, and have a higher rates of suicide and incarceration. Some statistics specific to African American males: 72% of adolescent murderers grew up without fathers. 85% of youth in prison are from fatherless homes. It seems that every single domestic problem we have in this country is easily traced back to the simple, irrefutable fact that way too many children are being raised without fathers in their lives. This is a national problem, perhaps even a national security problem. What should we do at the federal level to solve this one? Mr. Parkinson.
So we need to make sure we've got federal policies in place that create an economic situation for opportunity and upward mobility. There was a report written, I believe, in 2009 by a guy named Ron Haskins, and he talks about the success sequence. And what that is, it's when you graduate high school, and then you get a full-time job, and then you get married, and then you have kids. If you follow that sequence, there's a 97% likelihood that you will not fall into poverty. And we need to educate people on that path to prosperity. I think that there's all sorts of other federal policies that we can make sure that we're removing disincentives to marriage. We got to get rid of the marriage penalty in the tax code completely. We got to make sure that people understand that they shouldn't just fall into anti-poverty welfare benefit programs that are a safety net because they get trapped in the net. We want them to fall onto a trampoline through pro-growth policies that spring them up into work activation. And for all these kids that are growing up without a father, I feel deeply for them. We've got to have mentorship in our communities. That comes on all of us, not just as men, but as women that are out there as well. There's so many children right now that are looking for help, and instead they're getting bullied by gang members or other people at the school. Let's step up and fight back for kids. That means that all of us need to take more time in our communities rather than on our sofas.
Mr. Smith.
So I believe in the report. I grew up without a father. I grew up without brothers or sisters, and it looks like I turned out okay. I found my brothers in the Marine Corps. But to the point, why can't we as Republicans support and promote the nuclear family? If the studies are showing that fatherless homes produce disasters, by and large, then our position should be that the nuclear family, a mother and a father, is what's best for a child. And that's where I stand. I think that when we incentivize fathers being out of the home, where we promise the mothers, particularly in the black community, we promise the mothers, oh, you don't need him, and you let him go about his business. We will give you money so that you can pay your bills. I think these are the things that are promoting the problems that we see in this country. And to the moment that any of us thinks this is just an individual problem, this is outside of our areas, some of the people you mentioned in the report go on to kill Americans, go on to harm Americans, go on to rob and steal. I think it's a problem for us all. And I think one of the ways we need to address that is that Republicans should begin again to get back to God, get back to the fact that there's a mother and a father raising a child.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Emord.
We've had since really the progressive era a movement of secular humanism where religion has been attacked by public entities like the schools and like government. And that has helped erode our virtue as a nation. George Washington and many of the founding fathers believed that without virtue, our country could not remain a republic. And so it is indispensable that we stop this attack on religion in the schools, that we stop this attack on every aspect of the nuclear family that is going on, and instead support the nuclear family in policy and as well ensure that we protect against those instances where schools are actually attacking children of faith and eroding the whole concept of religion in the schools. You know, the Founding Fathers didn't intend for the public market, the public square and the public school to be rid of religion. They didn't want an establishment by government of religion. But they did want a virtuous people, a religious people, a people who would be individually responsible as well as protected in their families. So we should do that.
Okay. Next question to Mr. Emord, then Parkinson, and then Smith. Last night, Liberal host Bill Maher on his HBO show delivered a powerful and devastating monologue. Perhaps you saw it. Maher said that while he does not have kids and frankly doesn't like them, it should be every adult's job to protect them. In particular, Maher mentions a recent Max documentary about the dark side of kids' TV, which depicts, in his words, obviously inappropriate, highly sexualized degradation. And, Mr. Parkinson, you'll enjoy this, that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wasn't wrong. Maher makes the case that our political tribalism has gotten so bad that today even child molestation is okay if the guy from the wrong party calls it out. Another two-part question. Obviously, Maher is right about the sexualized degradation of our children, but what should the federal government do to protect our children? And is Mr. Maher right about the tribalization of our politics leading to our cultural division so bad that it is damaging and not protecting our children?
Would the moderator allow me to pose a suggestion real quick? Can we each have 2 minutes for this response? Would that be okay?
Go right ahead, sir.
I'm up? Okay. One of the most extraordinary things that we're witnessing is the sexualization of youth, the destruction of their innocence. This is truly child abuse. When you introduce sex to a child who's prepubescent, that is child abuse. You are taking away their innocence. You're destroying the right of a family under the 14th Amendment to control the education and upbringing of their own children. You're using the state as a proxy for the parents to come up with this secular humanist view that they should promote this agenda, which it is, a far left agenda, that causes children to lose their faith. This is not acceptable, and so we must make this an issue on federal level by passing law that recognizes child abuse to be the destruction of the innocence of children, and to make sure that we protect them against it. And we need to audit the schools to end this whole scourge that is ruining our kids. Also, I would say he's right on the point about the division that's going on in this country. But that does not justify us compromising in order to lowering our standards in order to meet the far left agenda. We've got to attack the far left agenda. You know, we're in the majority. The fight is on, yes, but it's a radical minority fighting against a majority of Americans who do share our values and beliefs. And it's time for us to stand up. We have to stand up in this election. We have to ensure that we win over Tim Kaine. And we have to also ensure by our numbers that this agenda, this radical agenda, is rooted out of the military, rooted out of our schools, and we need to stand up for our kids' rights. And you know what also we need? True school choice. We need to enable children to be able to leave school, their parents take them out of school, go to another competing school, and have the dollars that are expended on them in that school go with them so that they can afford to do that. And we need competition in education to get rid of a lot of this.
Thank you. Mr. Parkinson.
Well, thank you for allowing us to do 2 minutes on this. I think it's a really, really important question, so I appreciate that extra time. You know, when COVID hit, my kids were pretty devastated. The oldest, she was only in 4th grade at the time. She's an 8th grader today. And we had to explain to them how adults were trying to make a decision based off of fear to try to keep them safe. But they were pretty healthy, and they were terrified. The fact that you had to wear a mask everywhere you went. And, you know, they were told by other adults that they were either going to kill their teacher or their grandparents if they get sick and a runny nose. And I think that we got to stand up and actually be advocates for our kids against these adults that are trying to indoctrinate them. One of the policy positions that I recently took is something that I think is common sense. I said that we should have the death penalty for pedophiles. And I did that in response to an email solicitation that Tim Kaine used against me to raise money, where he was saying I was using hateful rhetoric and dangerous rhetoric against the LGBTQ community because I implied that pedophiles were a part of that community in the plus. The plus is supposed to encompass everybody that doesn't identify as one of the other letters. And we know that for a long time there have been some pedophiles that have tried to be a part of that community. Well, the Supreme Court has previously said that there can't be a death penalty for pedophiles. Ron DeSantis, my former boss in Florida, they've passed legislation in Florida. So now there's going to be a case where eventually this goes back to the Supreme Court. Now that we have a conservative court, thanks to those 3 justices that Donald Trump nominated and the U.S. Senate confirmed. You know, another big story, speaking of my daughter, I picked her up from public school in 6th grade after the kids went back. And she's got tears streaming down her face. And she says, "Daddy, the girls won't let me sit with them at class in the cafeteria because they know that I'm not vaccinated. I want to get the vaccine, Dad." And I said, "Sorry, sweetie. Your mom and I don't think that it's safe for you. You're not getting it." And she was really upset, but I told her, if those other parents have something to say, have them come talk to me. This is an adult conversation where we need to look out for the best interests of our children, even if it means the peer pressure in progressive Arlington is going to come after us. And I've got people that are taunting us. I've got people that are threatening us and throwing their own death threats toward my family, but we've got to fight back for our freedoms and for their future. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Mr. Smith.
So right about here, I would add a little humor and say that my friend asked for 2 minutes and he took 3. But that's humor, and I like him, and he knows that. He knows that.
I will grant you the same time, Mr. Smith.
All right, no, well.
But you seem to be far more efficient in your use of words.
Do you know what amazes me a lot is that the very people that talk about how they don't like children, don't want children, wish they never had children, are the very ones who were protected as children so that they didn't either get into trouble or they didn't walk the wrong way or go out so late at night. You know, our Constitution speaks about this, and I don't want to get too heavy in the woods, but the Constitution says that we have constitutional rights. Now, the founders only had 10 amendments, but here's my point. In those 10 amendments, each of us has rights. And no one can take those rights away. People didn't give it, so people can't take it, right? These are God-given rights. But our children also have constitutional rights. And they may not know to say, "Hey, Papa, help me," or "Hey, Papa, this person's doing this." Papa has to do that. In my own case, I was that Papa. I raised a son by myself when his mother and I divorced. He finally graduated from the Naval Academy. But there have been many days when I would go outside and I would see something coming toward him, and I'd run and I'd try to shield it, or I'd see someone saying, or I'd go in the store and I couldn't find him, and I'd become worried. Unlike Bill Maher, a lot of us believe that our children are our future, and you take away the protections of these children, you're really taking away the heart of America, the core of America. You're really predicting probably the extinguishment of America. Children are the fabric, the meaning of our society. I've heard a lot of people say they are the reason why we're here. We need to stand up for them. I disagree with Bill Maher, at least in the sense that we cannot abandon the very vulnerable people who rely on us for their very survival. Not just for eating, not just for sleeping, not just for knowing when to come in from outside, but to danger that's all around them, like the crazy Democrats.
You bring up an interesting point, and I was going to pose it. I'm glad you gave me the segue, Mr. Smith. Should we be looking at the protection of children as a basic civil right?
You've lost me completely, Mr. Moderator. They have constitutional rights,
but
which
we don't talk about it in terms of having the civil right. Are there rights being abused, and should they be protected under federal statute specifically?
I am not in favor of making new laws where we have laws that already enforce the very rights, in this case, that children have. I happen to believe that the constitutional right, even though the Democrats have treat our Constitution as a comic book, I believe the constitutional rights that children have, that you and I have, are the most fundamental, most important, and most pervasive rights in this country. We simply don't enforce it that way. Listen, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, ahead of every other law. Any law you might want to make is never going to be higher than the Constitution. And if we enforce those rights for ourselves, we need to enforce those rights for the people who are most vulnerable in our society, our children.
Okay, Mr. Emord.
Well, there's a long line of cases under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that recognizes that parents have a right over the education and upbringing of their children. And this needs to be enforced. We need to protect children. You know, there are instances across the United States and in this Commonwealth in which teachers are sexually abusing children. It's not only that there are instances of this whole secular humanism and this whole ridiculous movement towards accelerating transitioning, and I would make it a federal felony to aid or cause the transitioning of anyone under the age of 18. But in addition to that, there is abuse of children going on in schools that receive federal funding, and those schools need to be checked under Title IX, which protects children statutorily against those abuses, and Title VI, and we have to enforce those things. So I would audit the schools and find those instances where there are sexual abuse by teachers, where there are instances where children are being sexualized prematurely, and I would enforce the law in two ways. First of all, I would have statutory provision that would define what child abuse is, and then ensure against it, but we will cut off federal funding to those schools that have this abominable practice going on inside those schools.
Mr. Parkinson.
So I believe in parents' rights. I think that the parents' rights movement is incredibly powerful today because of what's happened over the last 4 years. And how would I extend our constitutional rights? Of course, I would extend them to all U.S. citizens, and that includes kids. But the bottom line is that we've got manipulative people in kids' lives that are trying to indoctrinate them and change the way that they listen to their parents or other adults that should have their best interests at heart, whether it's their pastor counseling them on Christian positions, or whether it's their mom and dad that are trying to help them through other mental health crises. I think that there's a mental health crisis today that's facing our children because of the decisions that those same adults made during COVID. And the parents' rights movement, it might have been born in Loudoun County over what happened with the rape in that bathroom. But it is not dead, because we see the indoctrination happening year after year after year. Just now in Fairfax County, they hired an expert in kink to review the pornographic material in the school library. It is outrageous. You can't make this stuff up.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. The next question was on education, so let's go there. Back to Mr. Parkinson, then Mr. Smith, then Mr. Emord. I'm sure we've talked about school choice in particular. It seems like everyone's in agreement there, and I've long advocated for it myself in the legislature. What specific policies in K-12 school choice do you support from the federal government?
Yeah, great question, right? Because typically people think that education should be left to the states, and I agree with that in terms of the curriculum. But I support universal school choice and school freedom so that the federal dollars follow the parent and the student and the backpack, not educational institutions. The model bill was just passed through the Arizona legislature last year, universal ESAs. It's a fantastic idea. And what it will do is it'll create competition between schools. You don't have to just take your money from a public school to a private school. You can have public schools competing against each other for better outcomes and K through 12 opportunities for all children. That's what's important here. How are we going to make sure that they're resorting back to math, reading, science, and actually U.S. history? I want to empower the states to determine those issues, but it does mean that we've got to have school freedom with the federal dollars.
Mr. Smith.
So bricks and mortar don't teach. Buildings and desks don't teach. What teaches are good teachers. And the responsibility for what's being taught to these children, the authority for what's being taught to these children comes from the parents. We have to stop the day when teachers can get in class and teach Johnny or Sue whatever it is they want about someone's sexual relations or sexual orientation. We send our children to school to be taught. Ultimately, we're looking at math, science, English, and we're thinking and focusing in that direction. But our children should not be assaulted by the onslaught of who had sex with whom, what body parts this person has outside of the biology curriculum, outside of the curriculum which the parents have authorized. Certainly, parents are aware of. I mean, it's awful for your son or daughter to go to school and come home from school and tell you that they've learned about someone's body parts outside of the, the class presentation, outside of what the curriculum is. We have to, as parents, we want to make sure we rein in what our children are being taught, and we're ahead of that. Again, our children have rights. I know my colleague believes that parents have rights over the children, but children have their own constitutional rights, which can be enforced, should be enforced by their parents.
Thank you, Mr. Emord.
So there's a Marxist agenda really supported by the NEA and public education across the United States and throughout our own state. Social emotional learning is really a recipe for disaster that's going on in the schools. We have critical race theory that's being taught all across the country that's dividing children based on race. And we have social emotional learning, which is causing kids to focus on emotional factors that are unrelated to education, so that we end up with schools that are basically teaching kids how to think rather than teaching them what to think rather than teaching them how to think. And that's the critical problem with public education. We've got people graduating who can't read in large numbers all across the United States. We have some of the lowest learning levels in our own state and among the states. And that's really horrific given the standards that are going on. So we need competition. Competition is the solution. And that means true school choice. And that means that the parent can take the child out to go to micro schools and home schools or whatever schooling alternative they wish, and create competition for the public education system, because the public education system is now a heavily bureaucratized system that is advancing a far left agenda to basically turn every child into a Marxist by the time they graduate from high school, even if they're illiterate, and make them government dependents by encouraging them to not even know their own sexual identity, not to know that their birth sex ought to match with their gender.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. The next question goes to Mr. Smith, then Emord, then Parkinson, on higher education. Higher education is now financed almost exclusively by the federal government. Yet it is the state governments and college boards that set the prices that we end up paying for. Should the federal government also set the prices of our universities, or should state regulating entities like the Virginia State Corporation Commission step in to set the prices?
I think the federal government should get out of the business of educating, period. Period. If we're talking about funding for programs, I think the federal government should follow whatever the state authorizes. At any stage, I think where we have a school which receives funding from the federal government, at least as your United States Senator, I will not vote for any program that authorizes funding for a school that does not educate, or that takes children out of the basic curriculum without the specific authorization from the parents. I think these are slippery slopes we go on. And again, I'm the no exceptions candidate. I believe we send our children to school to be educated on programs that they are going to need as they approach the university, as they approach the high school and university levels. To your question, I don't think the federal government should be in the business of running our universities. I think those are better handled at the state level, and certainly by the private institutions.
Okay. Mr. Emord.
You know, we've witnessed the standards in education drop at the collegiate level. We've witnessed the colleges become really factories of Marxism, as well as factories of anti-Semitism, of censorship, and they are really destroying what was the idea of a university. In virtually every major university in the country, these characteristics now are present of censorship, disallowing dissent, promotion of anti-Semitism, racism, allowing for expansive views of Marxism to proliferate, destroying the history of the United States by teaching false histories of the United States from the 1619 Project, not just in high school, but all the way through college. So the government is best put at cutting off funding for federal funding for higher education, and we are also best put at incentivizing the creation of vocational schools and other schools that will give technical opportunities so that you don't have to go through these schools. Kids going through these schools today are getting degrees that are largely worthless because they're not being given an opportunity to learn the true history of this country, and they're also being denied an opportunity to have an employable skill. We have a whole bunch of kids graduating from college and they can't find jobs and they can't pay their student loans. We need to change the dynamic and have practical education in this country, and we also need to ensure that the federal government gets out of the business of actually financing the universities, which is what they're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Parkinson?
So when I was in college, I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I was trying to be a business student, and we're in the middle of the Iraq War, and I started getting really interested in politics, and I changed my degree to political science, and I remember telling my mom, and she was like, "No, don't do that." But the point is there are a lot of people that graduate with degrees that they have a hard time finding employment after that. I oppose the federal government setting college tuition rates. I think that that's an expanded government approach that is totally unconstitutional and not necessary. I do want the states to decide that price. But you need to have competition between the schools. And we know that in Virginia, we've got a fantastic university in Liberty University where people come from all over America to experience high-quality Christian private education. And so those need to be the incentives that are in place where people are going to say, hey, you know what, this is what our tuition cost is, and if you're not willing to pay it, that's up to you. But what we don't need to have is the federal government, big government, coming in and setting those prices.
It seems the only diversity program that is not celebrated on American campuses is thought diversity. What should the federal government do to protect the very people we are investing in to make sure that they can freely express themselves on college campuses without fear of retribution socially or their grades being lowered for thinking out loud? Mr. Emord.
Well, we should have a condition precedent to any money that does go to the universities under current programs, and that ought to be that there be no racism, no anti-Semitism, and that in addition, that there be a liberal allowance for opposing viewpoints, that the First Amendment be protected in fact by the operation of the university and that they not censor. So those things are essential. The university needs to be an open idea marketplace where respectful disagreements are honored and where children are taught the benefits of argument and of disagreement that rises to the level of a civil discourse, such as we're having here. And that needs to be the order of the day. And universities ought not be in the business of censoring every conservative student on campus. They ought to be in the business of encouraging a diversity of viewpoint. When they don't do that, they disserve the country and they violate the First Amendment. Most of these institutions are state institutions. They have no constitutional power under the First Amendment to engage in that viewpoint discrimination. We need to enforce it.
Mr. Parkinson.
Jonathan's 1,000% correct in his answer. It's a great answer. What I would add to it is that as a U.S. Senator, there are different federal strings that we can pull to make sure that these enforcement actions are abided by. The first one I would say is any nominations. Until we actually abolish the Department of Education, let's make sure that we're using the nomination process in the United States Senate to go after people if they're allowing for their civil rights of students to be infringed upon, and the constitutional rights of free speech in universities. Kids right now are having a hard time standing up and being that minority voice on campuses, especially our Jewish community. We've seen that in the way that Harvard and Yale, and I think it was Penn, gave their testimony before the House of Representatives just a couple months ago with Elise Stefanik. You guys all saw that video. And it's outrageous. So what we need to do as federal lawmakers is protect the civil rights of all students in the university system.
Mr. Smith.
So we continue to talk about civil rights here. I want to take you back to the Constitution. I firmly believe that the Constitution has in it rights guaranteed to the people. And let's just talk about the right we're speaking of right now, freedom of speech. Do we have freedom of speech only when university presidents think we have it? Do we have freedom of speech only when it's not raining? Do we have freedom of speech when it snows? Do we have freedom of speech when what we're talking about is not accepted by the people, by the administration that we're talking in? Or do we have freedom of speech as the founders intended, rights guaranteed to the people, always, at all times, no exceptions? We elect people to go to office to do a number of things. But one of the things I think Mr. Emord spoke to it was to honor the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. There are things that are happening on our college campuses which are direct, in my opinion, violations of the Constitution, and those people should be held accountable.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move to closing remarks. We have 2 minutes each. We'll begin with Mr. Smith, then Mr. Parkinson, then Mr. Emord. Mr. Smith.
If you arrest an American president for political reasons in an overt attempt to take down, tear down, do away with, eradicate the United States Constitution, you will be held accountable and subject to prison. If you bring home the basketball player and leave behind the Marine to rot in a Russian jail, you will be held accountable and subject to prison. If you destroy 33,000 emails after receiving a subpoena, you will be held accountable and subject to prison. If you deny one January 6th detainee their constitutional rights to have every single matter in their favor before trial, before conviction, you will be held accountable and subject to prison. If you fly one balloon over an American sky or Chinese flag or aircraft as a claim of right, you will be held accountable and subject to prison. We've got to get our country back. We've got to get our values back. We've got to get our faith back, because if we don't, we will be out of touch, off sync, out of reach, lost like some ship floating aimlessly through the night. I say, if you're looking for courage, real courage, how about a Marine, 0311, ground pounder? If you're looking for integrity, how about a Navy Giant commander, retired after 26 years of combined military service? You're looking for conservative loyalty, our type of conservative loyalty. How about the former chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia Beach? If you're looking for experience, how about someone who's practiced law for 45 years, which, mind you, is longer than anyone who has ever run for statewide office in Virginia in Virginia's 400-year history, Republican or Democrat? How about somebody born on the 4th of July? How about someone who believes in this country? I'm running on the backs and shoulders of all Americans, standing up for Virginians, standing up for Americans, and the only candidate standing, saying, praying, and believing, God bless America, lift every voice and sing, my country, 'tis of thee, the battle hymn of the Republic. We have to get our country back. I say, let the founding fathers come back from the grave. Let Dr. Martin Luther King come back down from Mount Olympus. We've got to get our country back. We've got to get our faith back. My name is Chuck Smith. I'm a candidate for United States Senate, and I ask for your support. Thank you all.
Mr. Parkinson.
You know, it is truly an honor to be a candidate for the United States Senate. For a long time, I was really happy being the guy behind the guy as I worked on Capitol Hill. And then when COVID hit, I just started to feel like these guys didn't have the actual courage to stand up and fight for us. I was deeply frustrated. And my wife and I started talking about it. We prayed about it together. And it was a decision that we decided to test the waters. And so a little bit over a year ago, I talked to like 1,000 people over 6 weeks. And a lot of people said, Scott, are you sure that you can run against Tim Kaine? He was Hillary Clinton's running mate, the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He's a U.S. Senator. He's been in office for 30 years. And I'm like, do you hear yourself? This is exactly why we have to run. We have to fight back against these career politicians like Tim Kaine. And they'd say, Scott, you've got little kids. This isn't your time. What are you doing? Do you really want to spend all that time away from them? And I'm often reminded of my favorite Bible verse. It's Matthew 17:20. It says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can tell a mountain to move from here to there. I've got the faith the size of a mustard seed, and it's been growing. And we've been planting mustard seeds all over Virginia for the last year, meeting with voters, earning their support, building the momentum, and bringing a coalition together that can actually fight back for our freedoms and defeat Tim Kaine in 2024. I think I'm the only conservative that can defeat Kaine. I hope you'll join me. Be one of my mustard seeds. ScottParkinson.com. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Mr. Emord.
So So in order to defeat Tim Kaine, we need a proven fighter, that's true. But we also need a proven fighter who actually wins, because we cannot afford to lose. And so, if we are going to have a proven winner, let me offer myself as that example. I'm a person who spent the last 38 years fighting against the deep state. I know the deep state inside and out. But I've not only fought the deep state, I've actually defeated it. I defeated the deep state in federal court on constitutional grounds more times than any other attorney in constitutional history. 8 times against the Food and Drug Administration, numerous times within the regulatory agencies themselves, against all odds, with liberal jurists on the other side judging the case, even with liberal jurists, even with the best the Department of Justice can offer. And this is a point. You have to be in the arena. You have to know how to fight. You have to know how to fight and strategically win. If we're going to defeat Tim Kaine, we need those talents. If we're going to overcome the socialist agenda that is destroying our country, we need to know how to draft legislation. I've written over 4 bills for members of Congress, including bills that have actually provided, one was called the Access to Medical Treatment Act. I wrote for Ron Paul. That was later reintroduced as the Right to Try Act and was signed into law by President Trump. The point is, we have to understand how to draft the legislation to save the country. We have to know how to fight to save the country, but most importantly, we need to have a proven track record of victory against the enemy if we're going to assuredly defeat it. Victory is not an option, it is a necessity. This is not a game, this is a war. We have got to win this if we're going to save our country and save our state. And so, I offer myself as your candidate. I ask you, join me in this fight. This is a fight that we must win together. Without you, I am nothing. With you, I am everything. We will save this country together, and we will make sure that the survival and success of liberty is a hallmark. We will make sure that the last best hope for freedom on earth does not disappear.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. I want to thank Jonathan Emord, Scott Parkinson, Chuck Smith for your candidacy, for your hard work and your love of this country. I'd like to thank the Good News, Free Will Baptist Church, Family Foundation Action, American Principles Project, Virginia Medical Freedom Alliance, American Fortitude, and WRS Strategies. Thank you, gentlemen. Wish you the very best.